Hi, I'm Dr. Chris Stevens, and this is the Psychology to Live By podcast.
A vision of you makes the darkness fall away.
Welcome to Psychology to Live By. Joining me today on this roundtable are four very thoughtful people from Network Music. So I welcome Terry McBride, CEO, Chris Norwood, Head of Strategy, Colleen Novak, Music Manager, and Karen Mix, Director of People Operations. And we are discussing my podcast with a deeply thoughtful and insightful artist, Luca Fogale. He's a Canadian singer-songwriter who hails from Burnaby, British Columbia. He's been twice nominated for Juno Awards for Best Adult Contemporary Album. And amongst other things, we discussed Luca's explorations of his psychological experience, including an ongoing tension between dark and light, between apathy and optimism. We discussed the therapeutic role that creative practice plays for him, and he talked about the necessity of dropping the ego even while recognising that creativity still comes from self. We talked about developing character, developing a better and more virtuous future self, and many other things. But in large part, the conversation was about courage and a faith in moving forward. All in all, he's a delightful human being, and it was a heartwarming and uplifting conversation. And speaking of heartwarming and uplifting, welcome, my friends. I know, obviously, you all know Luca, and I'm guessing that you can tell I was very drawn to the fella, and very bright, but very human. So, as always, I'm interested in your take on the conversation and your insights, questions, etc. Go.
Sure. Well, the concept of, and I think you called it the universal delusion, that banner of I'm not good enough, that who of us doesn't often have that sentiment, but it was really kind of a bit eye-opening for me. I think, did he use the term soft panic?
Yeah.
That idea of soft panic, but then flipping the narrative, like, well, that's something that can really drive you forward. That, like, your internal banner of I'm not good enough, but I'm going to show myself that I am good enough, and using that soft panic to drive yourself forward. That just kind of, I was like, wow, this is a great way, like, just even personally when that comes up, like, no, okay, so how do I dig into I am good enough, or I am at least in action moving forward to address whatever it is that's making me feel that way. That was just the concept. I was like, thank you. Shifting the narrative to something that can help me move forward.
Yeah, likewise, Karen. I in fact, in preparation for this, I wrote down the phrase soft panic in the background, I think it was. And isn't that a lovely way to capture just that quiet sense of unease that we carry around? It's sort of a mild urgency that we need to be doing something. And you're right to highlight how he then pivoted and talked about, he wondered, I think, whether he would have achieved anything if he didn't have that, And so on the one hand, we explored its problematic nature. On the other hand, its productive nature. And I've just for the benefit of the audience, when I talk about what I call the universal delusion, it's a story of how obviously, when we're born as babies, unless our parents are really psychologically damaged goods, they're going to love us unconditionally. It's not like we're not good enough, but somewhere in the life trajectory, that becomes a theme. and it's different across different people and how extreme it is, but um, it has these evolutionary origins, which I think I spoke about with Luca, about needing to belong to a tribe to survive, and it being existential if people don't value us. Um, and of course, the what am I looking for? The word, the price of not being accepted socially these days is not quite as high as it would have been in our prehistoric origins. Where literally we would die if we weren't in a tribe. You couldn't live by yourself. That's kind of disguised in contemporary life in many ways, because we're uber interdependent. The very clothes we wear, even the buildings we live in, everything we use, this medium, I wouldn't know how to construct a computer monitor, let alone a computer. But we have all these, we have abundance, and we have the safety usually of welfare systems and so on. So, but that does not change this quiet panic, and it still motivates us to be valuable to the tribe. And I'm sure others will talk about this, so I won't say too much. But it also then links into, when he was talking about how he, I think around about 20, was drawn into music. And it's when he realized that music was a method for, he recognized in others' music that he wasn't alone, that he felt understood in their experience. At last, I can feel it, and therefore I can perhaps form that kind of community. Yeah. So yeah, I'm with you. It's a lovely. I'm going to remember that phrase, that soft panic in the background, because it just as he was saying, about music, that phrase for me, I thought, oh gee, yeah, I can really relate to that. Yeah. Fantastic. Very, as I said, very thoughtful, very insightful guy. What else, my friends?
I'll go next. I was surprised at how late he came to music.
Yeah.
Usually to me, music starts to become a meaningful thing and just as you get to double digits, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, and really important when you're a, teenager to kind of to express yourself through the music that you listen to.
Mm.
The fact that he came to it in his 20s, and he really came to it when he was alone.
Mm.
And he came through it through starting to write songs.
Mm.
And that process made him feel seen.
Mm.
So his coming to music was fascinating to me, because it's almost like he was trying to figure out who he was at an age that most people think they know who they are.
Yeah.
So, it was just a fascinating concept.
Mm-hmm.
And just so late, which means I think he comes to it with a really different perspective.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yeah. No, it's very nice, Terry. Yeah, you're right, because he talked about, leaving home, leaving family, leaving community, and, going to university. And I think discovering, as many people do discover, especially if they leave home to do it, that their identity starts to untangle, and it's not supported by all of these external inputs and structuring patterns. And then the question arises, who am I, as you say? And then listening to music now for him had this really philosophical and psychological impact, that he recognized that maybe he's not alone in this realizing just how contingent self is, and that it might be more fluid than we thought, and this is a terrifying experience, and I think he was really disturbed by it. And so then music takes on an incredible function. I mean, it's not that he wasn't involved in music. I think he said he learnt piano and he found the guitar, and he had a brief dalliance with the idea of being a lead guitarist. What teenage boy doesn't, but he wasn't listening to music until his 20s in the way that often other people do. And he made reference to that, and he doesn't listen to music. I think at the phrase he said he doesn't listen to music for entertainment.
Yeah.
So he's when I was younger, my mates had a nickname for me, and it was D&M, which is deep and meaningful.
So what happened between then and then?
Exactly. Good one, Terry. Yeah, and I think it's pretty obvious that Luca is a D&M, and probably always was. So just a different type, a poetic type, really, and so. And then, of course, he could map that directly onto his own music making. Mm-hmm. And I think it was in that context he was talking about the ideal would be somehow like he is creating a community of people who could recognize themselves in his lyrics. And what did he say the ideal was? That there was no light on him at all, that it was just black. And, like he's an introvert. And he'd never have to do a social media post again.
He also didn't seem to be. I think he struggles with happiness, and I think you pointed out that evolution has nothing to do with happiness. It has to do with passing your DNA along, right?
That's right. Yes, though it does turn out that at least some of, and maybe a significant portion of what helps us survive also brings us pleasure or brings us joy, like sex or good food or, being in nature and enjoying the view of water and trees and so on. So, but fundamentally the driver is not happiness. And in many ways, if you think about the artistic pursuit, a lot of it is bloody hard. You're in doubts, you're in at impasse, you struggle to express. And so this raises the other question, Terry, of how do we define happiness? And the ancient Greeks made the very useful distinction between hedonic pleasure, as in hedonism, and eudaimonic, which is probably translates more to meaning, purpose, satisfaction. And suffering, I don't want, that word's not quite right, but suffering for a project that's worthwhile is a pretty universal thing as well. No pain, no gain if you go to the gym, right? But again, I think he's got his is a poetic sensibility. And show me any poet who doesn't have the capacity to suffer profoundly. Which and the flip side of that doesn't have the capacity for sweetness and for profound experience of meaning and purpose and love and intimacy and so on. I don't really think you can have one without the other. Yeah. But so very very interesting guy in that way, I think, atypical, as you've pointed out, Terry, in terms of the typical trajectory, and even musical tastes, right? When I asked him what kind of music, he said, well, soft. It wasn't heavy metal, or thrash, or yeah, it was soft. Beautiful. Colleen, what lurks?
Well, and just to follow up on that, I
Yeah,
think it was interesting that he mentioned it could have been, painting, it could have been a different
yeah,
medium. It just was what he wanted to put his focus on, which I think it was a really good example of, if you really work hard at it and you really have that passion for it. And obviously he has talent, but
yes,
yeah, he really went for it.
yeah, and I mean, in that sense, the Luca Fogale project, as it were, is kind of independent of the means, right? I mean, I felt a lot of congruence with Luca in terms of, to use Rebecca Goldstein's phrasing, my mattering project. I probably could have gone down the musical path, or I could have gone down the writing path. Um, and in some ways, for me, I mean, and I'm happy with the psychological path and helping people and so on. But in some ways, that's not as important as the driver underneath.
Yeah.
And yeah, and I guess all of us on this call are happy that he chose the music path, right? Because I yeah, and I mean, I had his music playing. What I usually do when I interview the musicians, I have their music playing sort of on loop for the week before in the background, and uh, it was very pleasant having that, and then occasionally zeroing in and listening to the lyrics. Um, yeah, yeah, but I don't think it has to be specifically the music. There's a very clear purpose. But what's interesting though, it's not didactic.
Hmm.
Sometimes when people have that kind of approach, the music can feel a little bit didactic, a little bit like here's how to do it, and so on. And I don't think he's just like that. It's still very exploratory, very quite personal. Um,
And he
yeah,
will probably explore the other parts down the road when he, needs to change, and he'll probably be as
yeah,
successful. But it was nice to just, he it's always nice to hear they get as much out of it as you get from it, and that exchange on stage as well. And
yeah,
and yeah, he was just a very, very kind and thoughtful person.
yeah, exactly. And you make a very good point there. I think about the the potential benefit of connection on stage with the audience. Um, because that's also an antidote to this sort of existential feeling of aloneness, right? And people often talk about that sense of intimacy, in the collective, which is also another. Well, I think it's doubly or triply important in contemporary life. Um, in tribal life, that would have been a very normative experience. Singing around the fire, or dancing together, um, and even growing up, in my time, I'm not religious, but you'd go to church regularly and sing together, um, and there's less and less opportunities for that collective sharing of deep meaning, and So that's a really, really, really important function. I mean, I'm telling you guys, but you've got a business that's dedicated to this, right?
Well, and also why artists have such a hard time coming off of tour, because it's
Yeah.
weeks and weeks of that engagement and interaction, and then they come home and it
Yeah.
just stops. So,
Very good point, Colleen. Yeah. Spoken as a true music manager.
Mhm.
Um, yeah, no, it's true. And, weirdly, it reminds me of, war veterans who come back to normal life. And although they don't want to be in war, there's something about the intensity of it and the camaraderie that they don't find in everyday civilian life. They find everyday civilian life quite alienating. It's a big part of the PTSD issue is that. Um, and so they often engage in reckless behavior, to sort of get the adrenaline rush again. Yeah. And I also know that because, I've worked with a lot of uh, performing artists of various types and often get a bit depressed after a tour or after a really high on stage. And because, it's almost like what goes up must come down. Yeah. Very, very good, Colleen, as usual. Chris, what's going on?
Trying to think of where to start here. There's a few nuggets and then a
Yeah.
few overarching themes. And I think like, we've talked about a few of the nuggets, the soft panic, of course. I think that's probably one that stuck out to all of us a little bit.
Hmm.
Um, but and the way that music was characterized around this theme of connection. And as you just sort of explored a minute ago, but the other one that has kind of sat with me after watching this a couple of days ago was like I was impressed at the idea like people contain multitudes, right? I was impressed at the way that Luca was able to explore whether it's these characteristics or these events or this part of his history and his past and look at it from a lot of different sides, not just like the bad part, but also the good. Like how can we look at this through a different lens and turn it into something that we can mold to something positive? Um, and maybe that's the benefit of thinking about it in hindsight, perhaps, but also it just seems like he's the type of person that is able to take these types of things and take what life throws at you and be willing to examine it, the good and the bad and all sides of it, which is, the ability to hold ambiguity and conflict,
Hmm.
let that sit and be comfortable in that is rare.
It is rare. And like all artists, they give us a kind of, they give expression to something that we already know, but we haven't been able to articulate ourselves. And so we recognize something in it. That's that's the other thing is that it's not just that they share our experience. They help us understand our experience, and especially exactly what you're talking about. I mean, it's pretty confusing. Um, we contain multitudes, as you say. What's that? Walt Whitman, I think. Um, that's kind of scary. Like you might grow up with a fairly unchanging view of self, and it's reinforced by family, by church or school or friends, and then you get out into the big wide world, and that's not supported anymore, and then you realize, well, and I think this is what he was doing, and this is fairly typical. It's like, well, what's the real me? And then gradually there's a realization there's not a real me in that sense. Um, that we contain not only multitudes but contradictions. That there is a certain style that runs through it, and I might call that personality, and we certainly have attributes, but apart from that, the real me. This probably, Chris, links to the discussion I had with Luca about developing character and virtue. Whereas you're not just doing an archaeological dig to discover what's like there and set. You're actually inquiring into the nature of being, the nature of, as a verb, like the nature of the way that we sculpt ourselves in the process of living, right? But that's really hard and scary for people, right? To come to a place where we can accept our own fluidity, right? And to draw a connection, I think that is probably critical. All that evolutionary stuff and the stuff we talked about needing to be valued by the tribe and so on. That's kind of contingent on this assumption that there is a finite, fixed, real me in here, and it has definite qualities and a definite value, right? And of course, once you really see, as many of the spiritual traditions talk about, that there's no self like that in here that either has or doesn't have value, that's pretty unsettling. But it's not the end of the inquiry. The inquiry goes on then, well, how can I be in this more fluid way? And I think an artistic life's a really good way of doing that. And to come back, to what Karen was saying, probably attached then to projects, to this idea that, well, can I pour this into a way of becoming, a better person, a person who is enjoying their existence, who finds meaning and purpose. Yeah. So it's, the theme of the complexity of self ran all through this conversation.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yeah. Were there any other little nuggets there that you were going to raise?
Honestly, that we kind of talked through them. Like I said,
okay.
the soft panic is just such a great phrase. It's a great album title, I think, as well. Soft panic in the background.
Yeah.
But yeah, like just struck him by how open, he was to just like what life brings to you and how to channel it. Yeah.
It's really interesting because you could see that in the podcast, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like you can kind of see what he's like in the way that he conducted himself. He's very thoughtful, isn't he? Like he'd pause, and you can hear the mental machinery turning, and it's live, so. I think that speaks to what I was trying to get at there too about how this is going to inform one's way of being, and there in the podcast is a very good example of that. That's a fantastic way of being. It's authentic, it's exploratory, it's creative, and so that's I think a pretty good place to end our discussion today with this appreciation of how operating in this way then becomes your way of operating, right? So one's life becomes more creative, one's everyday living, conversations takes on this creative style. And in that sense, back to Colleen, it doesn't have to be music, it can be a conversation with a complete stranger. All right, my friends. Well, Not bad. Not bad. No, very good. And as always, take good care of yourselves. We'll convene again soon to discuss something else. But I wish you well.
Have a good weekend, everybody.
Okay, bye-bye. You've been listening to the Psychology to Live By podcast. If you'd like to know more, my website is www.drchris.life, and click on the videos tab to find links to all my social media. And if you like the podcast, tell people that you like so they can like it too. And the atmospherically beautiful song you've been listening to in the background is Horizon by Luca Fogale.